Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea from the brilliant Kenyan writer Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o. And it's this: colonialism's most effective weapon wasn't the gun, it was language. Seriously, it's a concept that'll completely change how you think about power and history.
Ngũgĩ kicks things off with this incredibly sharp distinction. A bullet can conquer your land. Sure, it can force you into submission physically. But he argues that to truly dominate a people, you have to conquer their spirit, their very idea of who they are. And for that, language was the ultimate weapon.
So, what was the real goal here? It's so easy to just think of colonialism as being all about money and resources, controlling land, labor, and wealth. But according to Ngũgĩ, that's only scratching the surface. The real objective was something much, much deeper.
He argued that for any of the political and economic control to stick, it had to be propped up by something else: mental control. The goal was to completely dominate what he calls the mental universe of the colonized.
And this difference is absolutely critical. Physical control is about taking your stuff, your wealth. But this other kind, this mental control, is way more insidious. It's about taking away your culture, the very tools you use to define yourselves. This was the key, you see, to making domination feel normal, maybe even like it was meant to be.
And to describe this whole process of systematic cultural destruction, Ngũgĩ came up with this unforgettable metaphor: the cultural bomb. Just the name alone tells you exactly how devastating he believed its impact was.
This definition is just so precise, it's chilling. A bomb doesn't just damage things, right? It annihilates them. And the target here wasn't buildings or armies. It was a people's core beliefs, their belief in their own names, their own language, their history, even their own ability to achieve anything. The goal was to just hollow out their self-worth from the inside.
So how exactly do you deploy a bomb like this? Well, Ngũgĩ breaks it down into a clear two-step process. First, you have to systematically attack and devalue the local culture, make it seem primitive or savage or just worthless. Then, into that empty space you've just created, you push the colonizer's language and culture, presenting it as the one true standard for intelligence and civilization.
And this attack was comprehensive. We're not just talking about one or two things. It was everything that gives a people their identity, their art, their spiritual beliefs, how they understood their own history, their connection to the very land they lived on. All of it was a target.
And we have to remember, this wasn't some abstract academic process. This cultural warfare had profound, deeply personal, and psychological consequences for millions and millions of people. Just try to imagine this on a human level. You're a child in a colonial school, and you get physically punished for speaking your own mother tongue. The language of your home, of your parents, of your community is suddenly tied to shame, to being backward, to actual physical pain. It wouldn't take long for a child to learn that their own language is a source of humiliation.
And this whole process was backed up by some of the biggest intellectual names in the West. Here you have a quote from the famous philosopher David Hume, basically framing racism not as a prejudice, but as a simple, natural fact. This gave a kind of intellectual permission slip for the whole colonial project. And, it wasn't some isolated fringe opinion. Here's another one from Thomas Jefferson, a founding father of the United States. When the most respected and celebrated thinkers of the day are saying this stuff, it hammers home the message that the colonized people are, by nature, inferior. So when you put all this together, the effect is just devastating. It basically trains people to see their own history, their entire heritage, as this empty wasteland, a story with no heroes, no great achievements. And this creates this deep, sad desire to just cut ties with that past and try to identify with the so-called superior culture of the colonizer. And this is the final brutal goal of the cultural bomb. It's about completely breaking a people's spirit. It's about creating such a profound feeling of worthlessness that it just leads to despair and eventually a collective loss of the will to even resist or exist. But here's the thing, Ngũgĩ's work isn't just about diagnosing this terrible problem, it's also a search for the cure. After laying out the absolutely crushing impact of the cultural bomb, he pivots to talk about the path forward, the struggle to reclaim and decolonize the mind. This leads to a huge, fundamental question for anyone living in a post-colonial world. They've inherited the colonizer's language. So is it even possible to take a tool that was once used to oppress you and use it to express your own unique reality? And this is where Ngũgĩ makes a really critical distinction. He says you have to stop seeing the colonizer's language as a master, as something that automatically carries all that colonial culture and makes you a victim.
Instead, you have to start seeing it as a tool, just a neutral way to communicate that you, the creator, can control and give power to.
So the path forward has to be an active one. It demands a conscious change in how you think. First, you reframe language as just a tool. Second, you take ownership of it, becoming a creator, not a passive victim. And third, you use this new power to actively reclaim and celebrate the very cultures and identities that were once targeted for destruction.
And that's the whole point. For Ngũgĩ, real decolonization isn't just about political independence or changing a flag. It's a much deeper internal process of freeing your mind from that spiritual subjugation of the past.
So, in the end, Ngũgĩ's work leaves us with this huge question to chew on. It really forces you to think about how the longest, hardest battles for freedom are often the ones fought inside our own heads, in a world that's still shaped by all these historical forces. What does it truly mean to decolonize a mind?